I'm Peter Doherty from Belfast Metropolitan College, and I'm going to take you through the debugging features in Visual Studio 2008. So once you've built your application and resolved any build and syntax errors, you may find that your application still doesn't behave as expected. This could be just down to the program logic, and maybe you are looping through a loop one too many times, or making a method call in the incorrect place. Now what we can do is we can use the Visual Studio debugger in order to step through the program logic and flow and analyze variables and properties and so on at runtime to find out exactly what is going wrong and in order to resolve the problem. Now I've got a sample application here that I'm going to use to show you the debugging features of Visual Studio 2008. In order to debug an application, we first of all will set a breakpoint. A breakpoint is where our code will stop at just before that line of code is about to be run whenever the program is run in the Visual Studio debugger. Now first of all, in order to make a breakpoint on a line of code, we will open up the code file, and somewhere on the left hand margin on the line of code where we wish to actually stop before this line of code is actually executed, we will just left click, and notice we get a little highlighted in red indicating that this is a breakpoint. So that whenever this program is run through the Visual Studio debugger, the debugger will be broken into just before this line of code is about to be executed. We've set a breakpoint, so that means that whenever this line of code is about to be executed, our program flow will stop and we will be taken into the Visual Studio debugger, where we can step through our program flow and logic, analyze the values of variables and properties and so on. But in order to run our program in debug mode, we have a couple of different ways of doing that. We can press F5 on the keyboard, we can go to the debug menu and select start debugging, or we can click the little play button on the debug toolbar here, which will also start our application in debug within the Visual Studio debugger. So if we just click the little play button, and our application will load up. Okay, so we click on the Make a Booking button where we have set the breakpoint in that event handler. Notice that the line of code which is about to be executed is highlighted in yellow. Now once we've actually stopped the program flow within the debugger, we've got a number of options that we can do. We can step through the code line by line to analyze each line of code by, from the debug menu, selecting Step Into. So that line of code has just been executed. This line of code highlighted in yellow is about to be executed. What we can also do is, if we just want to continue on to continue the program flow on, we can just click the Continue button or select Debug Continue from the debug menu. So that will just continue the program flow along. It will stop whenever it hits another breakpoint, or it will continue on until the end of the method call. Now if we just close this and set another breakpoint, so we will get rid of this breakpoint by clicking on it again, and it vanishes. So I'm going to set a breakpoint in this little confirm booking method. So if I just set a breakpoint on the first line of code here, and if I run our application again, we'll show you some of the other debugging features built into Visual Studio. So if you just make a selection, click on confirm booking, and the method for the event handler for confirm booking has a breakpoint set on it. So we'll notice that the variable here, message, I can hover over that, and notice that the little tooltip says that message has no value currently. With debugging, we've got 3 debug windows as well, which we can use to analyze the values of variables and properties of objects and so on. We've got the autos windows, which lists all the variables currently in play. So we see message listed here, and we've also got the objects passed in the event handler, sender and E as event arguments. We've got the locals window, which is all the variables in the local scope. And we've got the watch window, which we can use to add variables which we want to keep an eye on. So in order to do that, I can just type it in. So just type in message. I have it here before as well. But within all these 3 windows, what we can do is we can see the value of a variable as we're debugging through our application, but we can also change the value of that variable. So if I want to change the value of message, I can just type it in the value portion of the watch window here. And because I have added it in twice here, it notices it's changed. Now, whenever a value is in red, it means it's changed since whenever we're in debug mode here. You also see the data type of the particular variable in question. Now, what I can do now is I can step onto the next line of code. The next line of code is a method call. We've got a number of different options whenever we are about to call a method. We can either step through every line of code within that method by simply performing the step into function. So notice now we jump into this membership type function. And if I continue doing step into or pressing F11 on the keyboard, we'll step through each line of code within that function. But if we have already tested the function and we know that it works perfectly fine, what we can do now is we can step out of that function, which means all the lines of code in the program flow of that function will be ran, and the debugger will be broken back into again whenever that function returns. So select step out or press Shift F11 on the keyboard, and I stepped out of that function. So as just move on, we've got another function call here. Now I know this playing day function is 100% okay, so rather than stepping on the function and stepping through lines of code and then maybe stepping out of it, what I can do is I can select step over, which means that all the lines of code in that playing day function will be executed in the program flow, and whenever it returns back, the debugger will break again on the next line of code. Now while I'm in debug mode here, I can also add in breakpoints, just like I wasn't running debug mode. So maybe I know these lines of code here are fine and I want to break whenever we get down to this line of code, so we can just add a breakpoint there, select continue, click OK, and notice now that we've broken the debugger just as this line of code is just about to be executed. Another window worth noting is the breakpoints window, which will list all the current breakpoints in our particular application, and we can enable and disable breakpoints. So notice that we've got a little tick here beside these breakpoints indicating that they're currently active. I can untick one. Notice that in the code window it becomes just an outlined yellow circle and an outlined box, which means that breakpoint isn't currently in play, but it's still there if we did want to re-enable it at some time in the future. So if we didn't want the breakpoint to be hit but we didn't want to actually remove it totally, we can clear it. What we can also do with the locals, watch and autos window is we can navigate through the values of an array whenever we hit a breakpoint. So here we've got this difference array. I'll set a breakpoint somewhere where we can see the value of that. We just run the application. I can make a booking, confirm booking, enter a score and enter some values in the score text boxes here. And click and calculate scores, which will mean this line of code is going to be executed. And the breakpoint has been hit on difference. So if I just scroll up here, see we've got the difference array and a little plus beside it. I can click on the plus and notice that the values of the array are all entered in here. I can also change those as I was changing the value of the message variable before, and any changes I make are highlighted in red. So those are the values of the 18 items there in the difference array. What I can also do with breakpoints is I can specify that a breakpoint will only be hit after it's hit a certain amount of times by using a hit count, or maybe that it's only hit on a certain condition, that maybe a variable has reached a certain value. This is especially useful in looping scenarios. So I'll just take this breakpoint off. I've got a little for loop down here. So what I can do is I can specify that maybe this breakpoint, which is within the for loop, is only going to be hit after the 4th or 5th execution of the loop here. So maybe note the first 4 or 5 times that the loop is executed, the values are fine, but maybe after that something's going wrong and I want to step through my code, see exactly what's happening. In order to do that, I set a condition on the breakpoint by right clicking on it, select condition, and what I can do is I can specify here that the value of a variable has changed or that a certain condition is met. So maybe I'll say that I is greater than 5. So what that means is the code will run through, that line of code will run through while I is less than 5, and then whenever I is greater than 5, the breakpoint will actually be hit. So I click OK, run the application. Our breakpoint has been hit here, but if I hover over the value of I, notice that it is now 6. So whenever I was equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the line of code was ran without breaking on the Visual Studio Debugger, but now that that condition has been met, the Visual Studio Debugger has been broken into and our breakpoint has been hit. Alternatively, what I could do is set a hit count on it. But just notice here, if I just navigate off that line of code, that as we have a condition on it, there's a little plus sign within our breakpoint. Alternatively, what I could do there is set a head count on it. So I can take the condition off, set a head count by right clicking it and selecting head count, and I can specify the breakpoint is break when the head count is equal to a certain value or a multiple of a certain value or greater than or equal to a certain value. So whenever the breakpoint is equal to 3, so after the breakpoint has the line of code that the breakpoint is on has been executed 3 times, this breakpoint is going to be hit. So if I run the code again, look at the value of I. I is now 9, where it was 5 before whenever we're running through it. So it's ran through an additional 3 times, and our breakpoint has then been hit by way of a hit count.